I'm going to show you the game between Georg Meier and Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, from round 6 of the Grenke Chess Classic. This was a really rich game and another long game as well for the world champion. Remember, the subscribe button to the channel is down there, and if you want to support the channel, then do check out the links in the video description to PayPal and Patreon.com. So on with this game. They had a rest day, and probably Carlsen needed that. He'd had 2 draws where he was probably a bit disappointed only to get draws out of these long games. So a rest was what he needed, what all the players in the tournament needed. Georg Meier, of course, coming off that loss against Vincent Keimer. So Carlsen plays a King's Indian with black. That's already very interesting. Clear. He's wants a tense struggle. And here, of course, c4 is the normal move, but Meier played a very calm choice, wants to get his bishop out, and then he's going to see what happens. Very interesting that Magnus now punishes his opponent for not playing the classical pawn move into the middle and plays b5. It's a very creative move. So interesting that you can already feel it at this early moment that Magnus is striving for the maximum in the position. So bishop b2 and bishop b7, and both sides just developing. And now here's an important decision for Meier. He needs to bring his queen into the game. So he really should be moving one of these pawns. Could play pawn to e3 and queen to e2. That would be quite solid, but he goes for c4 anyway, and Carlsen exchanges. And now I would have thought pawn takes pawn should be played just to keep those pawns together. But Meier wants piece play, wants to bring his knight out. It's reasonable, but it changes the pawn structure. So it now means that Carlsen has that lone A pawn, and he wants to play that forward, a little kind of minority attack against these 2 pawns. Very standard procedure. So black is not better here, but it gives Carlsen something to play for at any rate. So rook c1 and c5. So Carlsen trying to chip away at white's centre. You can see in a sense this pawn controls these 2, and after knocking out this pawn, then Carlsen will have a majority of pawns in the centre. You can see that right now, this clump of 5 pawns and these 2 against 1 in the middle. So this is absolutely positionally correct from Carlsen. And well, in every position you have to argue your case. Black is not better yet, but this is what Carlsen is playing for. That central pawn majority. If you control the centre, you control the board. Let's just bear that in mind. Bishop d4. So at the moment, Meier occupying the centre with his pieces. Here, probably, well, queen d2 could be played actually, and there's no drama, but a4 played. So fixing this one here, but of course, in some ways that's a compromise. Now those pawns are fixed, and there's potentially a weak square on b4. Now, a very interesting manoeuvre from Carlsen, and I suspect that Meier had perhaps underestimated this. Not that white is worse, but feels like black is doing something. Okay, why did he go rook a6? Because he can put the queen in the corner with some pressure on the long diagonal, but also potentially allowing rook number 2 to come to the c file. But this is Meier's idea with playing a4. He's managed to support the knight on b5. So obviously knight c7 threat, so rook c6. So that knocks out this rook. It's funny, I mean, really, you would like that queen to be, let's say, on b2 or b1 and to connect these rooks. But it's not so simple, because when the queen steps up, of course, it's a little bit vulnerable to attack from knight e4. So white has to be just a little bit careful here. And, well, Meier thought for over half an hour on that move. So absolutely typical for Carlsen's games. He was ahead on the clock, and that makes life not so simple for Meier. Knight e1. So he exchanges off those bishops, and now that means, of course, it's tempting to get rid of that bishop because there was potentially a threat here. But it does mean that white's king could be a little bit vulnerable. Carlsen thought here that perhaps he should just play h5 and thought that black was just very comfortable. But he went for rook c8, but it's not a bad move by any stretch. So try to control the c-file, and knight a7, also reasonable. And now simply the knight should come back to b5. And in this case, black really wants to drive forward with these pawns, but actually after e5, bishop c3, it's not so simple to do that. Tactically, there are problems here for white. This is potentially loose. You've got to watch out for knight c7 sometimes. Knight b5 should be played here, but queen c2 from Meier, and now the pawns can advance. And this feels tricky because you can see that this knight is just hanging for a moment. So you've got to watch out for d4. And now Carlsen is taking charge, even though, well, obviously rook c8 is not possible because of knight e7, but rook e8. And actually that knight doesn't have a strong support of a pawn. So it's a slightly tricky position. Meier goes for the a pawn, but actually it just doesn't matter that much. Carlsen said afterwards that this knight e4 looks so promising, but maybe it's not that clear. He said there were so many tasty choices. In fact, the way he played, I think, is excellent. Because after this, it's all about the centre. It really doesn't matter about that a pawn. The knight is sidelined, and black is starting to build up really nasty pressure in the centre. But also that means if you control the centre, there's a good chance you can switch your attack to the king as well. And of course, it's difficult for white when black controls that c-file. Of course, rook c1 is impossible because black will take on c1 and then take the knight on a5. White is really cramped here. This is the problem. So Meier nudged the bishop back out of range of the knight, but anyway, this one came in and exchanged off that bishop. Rook still looking good on the c-file. There's got to be a chance sometimes to come into c2. So this is Meier's chance. He advances his queenside pawns, but really they're not going very far. That queen on a8, what a fantastic piece it is. It has influence all over the board, particularly on that long diagonal. And here, Carlsen should definitely play d4 and get going straight away. But bishop f8 played. It's not a bad move, but white has a clever defense in a moment. Hitting the rook, and now d4. And here Meier, short of time, plays the move e3, which Carlsen described as pretty suicidal, and it is. It really weakens white's king, and well, really, the game should have been over quite quickly. As Carlsen mentioned, knight e3 should be played just to bring this knight to a better square. But it is extremely dangerous. Obviously, pawn takes knight allows queen takes rook. Black has this very dangerous move, queen c8, in order to come to h3. Carlsen was looking at this after the game, but this is probably good enough for white. The pawns generate enough play. But in this position after queen c8, knight c4, you can also play queen e6 and then put the queen into h3. And this is just a mad position. Here, black can try rook takes knight, pawn takes knight, e4. They're all possible with a huge initiative. But in any case, knight e3 is certainly the move that creates some complications. e3, the problem with e3 is that it weakens the f3 square. And Carlsen seizes on that straight away with knight e4, and this knight has the potential to spin back and get in here. Meier took here and put the knight back on b3, and now d3. So there we go. That extra centre pawn is proving its worth. Just piling down the board and really splitting white's position in half. It's very difficult for white to deal with that passed pawn while defending on the king side as well. Rook c1 played, exchanging off that active rook. Well, yeah, there was all kinds of possibilities to come with rook c2. Anyway, rook c1 played. And here, Carlsen exchanged on c1. He said afterwards he was sort of looking at bishop g7, but he completely forgot about bishop takes b4, which actually would win the game very quickly. A simple capture. Let's take a look at what might happen. An exchange of rooks. And d2, let's keep going. And now here's the killer move, knight g5. And white is utterly lost in this position. If knight takes pawn, we can take on d2. It's simply an extra piece because of knight f3 check. And if knight e3, we can give a check here. And the queen swoops in, and that is absolutely fatal. Queen e1 check. So bishop b4 is just a killer. That pawn is going to be supported, and black turns to the king side. But instead, Carlsen, he thought for 6 minutes over this move. He had time and simply overlooked bishop b4. So this was a very uneven game. And he took on a4. This is not bad. He could still take on b4 with the bishop, by the way, which should probably be stronger than this. And here d2 is probably a better move than played. But knight c5. Very tricky move, all these strange pins. Pawn takes allows queen takes queen, and knight takes would allow a check down here, and you take the knight and then the pawn will go through. So knight d2. Meier is hanging on. Bishop h6 is a better move here, but okay, this is not bad, but it looks absolutely terrifying for white, but in fact white is able to defend, just for the moment anyway. And queen e1 and king g2. So they've reached the time control, and Carlsen took on b4. So if queen takes bishop, then black gets queen. But this is not a simple position by any stretch. Obviously, if queen here, you can take and then the bishop drops. h5 from Carlsen, that gives his king a little bit more room, rules out knight g4. Meier blocks, of course, to stop black from playing h4. And now bishop a5. But this is very, very tough. Breaking down this defense is really very difficult. And over the next few moves, well, we see Magnus Carlsen do what he does in so many games. He spins around with his pieces. And Meier isn't quite sure whether he's going to make definite progress or whether he's just biding his time. So once again, Meier was consuming a lot of time. Here, I don't quite understand why knight d4 wasn't played. And there are chances to spin in with knight c2. I think once that knight gets into the heart of white's position, it's really difficult to defend. I mean, maybe Carlsen was simply worried that his king would be exposed in some way, but knight d4 seems like a good move. Bishop a5 played. But this seems to be his policy, to play relatively quickly and see what turns up. And as I said, Meier was consuming much more time. But not much progress has been made over the last few moves. Now things start to happen, actually, because the bishop has reached a better position where it looks through here, but also defends the king along this diagonal. So that feels like progress. And the king steps up, nice and solid, we like that. But here it's very strange how Meier played. He could just wait with the queen. And then Carlsen has to try and think of a way to bring this knight into the game. But it is absolutely not simple. But instead, Meier started on this, well, this death march with the king. as someone said online. It's very odd. The king needs to be behind the pawns. But this is a question of nerve. Meier obviously thought, well, you know, maybe this is my chance to grab that pawn, because Carlsen didn't seem to be doing much. But yeah, it's a loss of nerve, really. I think he should have just waited. But waiting, it takes a lot of energy. But this is terrible. After the check, then white's king is in desperate trouble. And now Meier took on d2, which loses instantly. Let me just show you that. King takes, and now queen e4, and that was the end of the game. Carlsen was very relieved, because there's a threat of knight f3. Listen, I'll come back to that in a second. King e3 could have been played. Queen f5 is a really strong move here. And let me show you this. This is fascinating. After knight takes d2, in fact, there's no immediate kill, but my computer points out bishop e5. And this position is Zugzwang, actually. It's a beautiful move. Whether Carlsen would have found this, I have no idea, but it's just fantastic. However white moves in this position, it compromises his position. If this f-pawn advances, then this pawn is simply too weak. If, let me see, if this knight moves, then queen f3 check will be fatal. If this queen moves, let's have a look, queen c4, then queen g4 is now a beautiful move, because after knight c3, the queen has moved away from this spot, and knight c2 is a killer. Let me just show you very quickly, for example here, and we take and take here. Basically everything works. Bishop e5 is an extraordinary move, absolutely beautiful move, a winning move. And if knight c3, then knight c2. is a winning move with king here, then bishop takes, for example. Okay, you can check that out yourself. In the game, king takes d2 and queen e4 was the final move of the game. So the threat, knight f3. And let's say if queen a6, no, knight here, let's say, yeah, this allows this, check, and queen takes. And if knight c3, then this, and check, and one of these, well, probably both these knights are going to drop. And a final variation, if queen a6, getting the queen out of the way, then knight b3 is actually checkmate. There you go. What was that king doing? Staggering around in the middle of the board. Very strange, but yeah, it's a loss of nerve from Meier. Carlsen said afterwards, I was tired and couldn't calculate anymore. It was an absolute mess today. My play has deteriorated over the last few rounds. I couldn't finish it off. So it gets to be a long game. Yeah, this is the problem when you're tired. That you miss little tactics and the game just kind of drifts on. And, well, I guess it's the sign of a good player. You know, it's one of those sporting cliches. If a team doesn't have its best day but still manages to win. And that's what happened with Carlsen. His absolute determination pulled him through in this game, and in the end it was greater than Meier's determination to draw the game. So there we go. Carlsen leads the tournament by a full point now. He's on 4.5, and there's a pack of players on 3.5. Carlsen will have a tough game tomorrow. He faces Aronian. In fact, Carlsen has a tough run-in. He's got Aronian, Vachier-Lagrave and Svidler. So this contest is still not over.